Hello, everybody. We'll be getting started in about 2 minutes, so please hang tight, and you'll hear from me at 30 past the hour. Good morning, everybody, and afternoon to others. Welcome to today's webinar, Communicating on Climate. My name is Nick Astor. I'm the Director of Marketing for North America for South Pole. We are very excited to be here to present to you today, and welcome to all. I know I don't need to tell anybody how a webinar works, but just so you know, we're going to have about an hour. If we need to go a little bit over, we're happy to hang out a little bit longer to make sure we get to everybody's questions today. Speaking of questions, you probably know the routine, but please ask your questions in the control panel on the side of your screen in the question box. We'll be collecting those questions throughout the webinar. And we will be asking them at the end, and don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to do that. This session will be recorded. You'll be given an opportunity to access that recording after the webinar. Please feel free to share it with friends and colleagues. And additionally, we're going to give you the opportunity to download a report which will summarize a lot of the major findings that we'll be discussing today. The instructions for doing so will also be sent to you after the event. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce real quickly who's going to be speaking to you today. Folks have gathered from all over the world. Cata Bors is our head of client communications. Carlos Garcia Borguero is here from Belgium to talk to us as well. Vicky Nice is here as well. And Isabel Hagbrink, our global head of communications, is going to welcome you all and say a few words. Just so we get rolling, for those of you who are not familiar with South Pole, next slide, please. We are a global climate change consultancy and carbon project developer. We work all over the world. We're almost 1,000 people now in something along the lines of 30 countries, 25 offices in those countries, plus some representations elsewhere. We've been around since 2005. There are a few people in the world who know more about climate change and how to mitigate climate change than our folks here at South Pole. And it's, of course, something we love to talk about and apropos of the topic today, communicate on. I'll turn it over to Isabel, who would like to welcome everybody, and then we'll get rolling.
Thank you so much, Nick. And so we are delighted to be here today to share this very interesting research with you. And just to paint a little bit a bigger picture, I think what we increasingly see is statistics on how few companies really are setting carbon neutrality targets. So we took a sample of 60,000 companies and we looked at, how many of them have actually set a carbon neutrality target, and of those, how many have set science-based targets or milestones to get there. And the results are terrifying. They're absolutely terrifying. Out of 60,000 companies, only 2% have carbon neutrality targets. And so what we're saying at South Pole is, if this is in fact the case, and if you don't back those carbon neutrality claims with science-based targets and milestones on and indications, details on how you're going to reach your carbon neutrality and net emissions targets, then you're setting yourself up for accusations of greenwash. So what we're here today to talk about is, what are the findings of the report, and what should you do as a credible a company with credible claims to ensure that you're managing your risk, you're managing your reputation, and you're ensuring that you do not get accused of greenwashing. Because what we want, of course, is credible claims and very ambitious climate targets. So not only do we need to increase those, so out of 60,000 companies that we surveyed, only 2% have carbon neutrality targets, woefully low. We need to get those numbers up dramatically if we're ever going to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And we need to ensure that such carbon neutrality targets are backed by science-based targets, essentially. So we're here to talk to you about that. We hope to make it clear, engaging, and we're thrilled to have you as part of this conversation today. Thank you so much. Over to you, Nick.
Isabel, thank you very much. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kata Bors, who's going to get us started. And as I mentioned before, don't forget to ask your questions right in that question box. It's usually on the right side of your screen. We'll get to those questions at the end. Kata.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome all. Welcome to this webinar. Let's start about setting the scene and taking a look into a very evolving landscape. It has never been more important for businesses and brands to get their climate communications right. And why so? Because stakeholder pressure is mounting. We are looking at a very varied landscape of stakeholders that are watching and are becoming more educated and aware about climate-related risks and the risks related to climate change. As a starter, governments are starting to set regulations to set companies up for backed up climate claims. Also, there is a momentum in new and evolving climate corporate reporting initiatives, and also civil society has become much more woke and aware, and they will not back up accusing and looking into the credibility of corporate climate claims. And we don't, it's not a new finding. Of course, consumers are much more aware about the sustainability credentials of companies, and they are really willing to buy services and products that are really walking the talk on climate-related actions. We see this growing momentum of corporate action as a result of this mounting stakeholder pressure. And last year in 2021, we have done another research, where South Pole was really interested in finding what is driving that corporate climate momentum. Corporates have started to set net zero targets, net zero commitment on the long term, but we were really curious about which stakeholder groups are most close to those companies and make them act on climate on the long term. And our net zero research found that consumer pressure is the biggest one that makes companies set net zero targets as of today. The second one was an opportunity. Brands and companies saw the opportunity in building sustainability credentials in their brand positioning. But also, as a third criterion, we saw that companies are really aware of the real risks and external shocks related to climate change, and they are really keen and serious about building resilience against those risks. And as the fourth criterion that we learned last year within our net zero research was that companies are really keen to protect and build their reputation. Hence, we saw that growing momentum in terms of setting net zero targets last year. We talked about governments a little bit already. Government pressure didn't make it to the top 4 last year as a driver for companies to set net zero commitments, but it is a real pressure and becoming a much bigger pressure as we speak today. So within a year, a lot has changed, and you can see that this map maybe in half a year will be even more colorful, because many countries have started passing regulations related to climate or ESG claims. Also, countries are moving ahead with consumer and market authority guidance or government standards to certify claims. And you will see with the green color, we do see a lot of court cases and litigation cases regarding ESG claims or ESG activities that are really on the rise on a global scale. We mentioned already a little bit carbon and corporate related initiatives. It's really great to see that the awareness around the science-based targets or CDP or the race to zero is really growing, and companies are realizing that making credible claims, and the only way to make credible claims and back it up by credible action is to really join those world-leading initiatives. And on the other hand, the debate is ongoing. For example, the VCMI public consultation process for climate neutrality claims or carbon neutrality claims is now up and ongoing, and we expect to see a new guidance being published by the end of the year. Or just to mention another example, the ISO carbon neutrality protocol is being also developed and discussed, and by the end of next year we will see new guidance from that perspective. And South Pole is monitoring those evolutions from a really close angle. We are part of those public consultation and expert groups to shape really the future of climate related claims. When it comes to climate communications, a lot is at stake. We already talked a lot about reputation and trust, but it has been long shown by studies and research that building in sustainability credentials into your narrative, into your strategy, business strategy, builds reputation and builds trust. It leads to increased purchase, loyalty, and advocacy from your customers or consumers. It also brings brand value to businesses. For example, 86% of consumers expect brands today to take action beyond their core product and businesses. And of course, we have to be all aware about the war for talents. It has never been more important to engage your employee base, and building a credible climate action is a really effective tool in empowering and building that employee satisfaction within your business. Now, all this was about the long-term trajectory, the long-term vision about a net zero future. But what can companies do and claim today to demonstrate real credible action? What they can do, and also Isabel mentioned already, is a science-aligned climate neutrality commitment or pledge that is part of a wider net zero trajectory. And also, as Isabel already mentioned, that the picture is not that positive as of today. The space is really evolving fast, but still there is a lot to do in this perspective. Out of those 60,000 companies, as mentioned, only a handful have set carbon neutrality targets. We see a little bit of difference within companies that are much mature, a little bit more visible, maybe publicly traded, because 23% of Fortune 500 companies have already set such a pledge. If you look at the companies, the little bit of over 1,000 companies that have a climate neutral commitment, out of those 1,075 companies, 40% already say they are climate neutral. They already say they got there, but only, unfortunately, 18% have backed up their climate neutrality claim by science-based targets, which means that we have to build much more robustness and much more credibility when it comes to climate-related claims. And building in sustainability credentials into business models, into business strategy is good business, because according to Kantar's latest research, environmentally conscious households are currently worth over $400 billion to the FMCG industry. If we move on, We can also see some statistics that we found during our latest research as of this year, 2022, April, May, that there are regional and sectoral disparities when it comes to climate-related claims. For example, in the North American region, only 22% of companies that had a climate neutral commitment had also set or committed to the Science-Based Target Initiative. So there you can also see that the robustness of those claims have to be improved. And even, shockingly enough, in France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, in that region, where greenwashing can result in serious fines and accusations, only 50% of the companies that had climate neutrality claims also committed to the Science-Based Target Initiatives, which means only 50% of the companies have put their climate neutrality commitment into a wider science-aligned net zero journey. What we can see is that as companies are visible to end consumers or they are really in direct contact with their customers, they are more likely to set climate neutral commitments. And you can see that, for example, in the FMCG sector, 25% of companies have set such a commitment, which is outstanding and which is #1 compared to the other sectors. And we have to also talk about the laggers. The energy, the financial and transportation sectors still need to set science-based targets if they want to back up credibly their climate neutral claims. But how to do that? This is the main question, right? So first we have to set strong foundations. We have to walk the talk. And then the first step in getting there is to figure out what you can and cannot say. And it is really simple. Talk about what you really do and level up your ambition. So building that really solid and strong climate action foundation is basically means that you earn the right to communicate about it. It doesn't mean that climate-related claims or communication in the climate space is without risks. There are risks on the way. For example, our research showed that conversations and discussions and in general awareness has grown significantly in the past 1 and 2 years. For example, the topic of greenwashing is really out there in media, and last year, for example, it was peaking around COP26, which also demonstrates the fact that those high profile events really drive awareness and really build education among consumers and stakeholders, and the world is getting really aware around how to measure credible claims and communication. And we already talked about the fines and court cases. Data shows that in the past 5 years, the number of court cases have doubled. So countries, NGOs, consumer protection bodies are moving ahead to take companies accountable for their claims. At South Pole, we are working along with clients to help them develop credible claims, and we have a relatively easy framework of doing that. We always advise for our clients and companies to champion 4 things. First of all, they have to champion transparency. They have to avoid vagueness at all costs. They have to be very robust and transparent on reporting and disclose how they back up their climate-related commitments. They also have to become and demonstrate accountability towards their climate-related commitments. It basically means an honest and transparent update on progress, acknowledging difficulties, acknowledging also dilemmas, but also making sure that the results are accessible transparently to customers, consumers, and the wider stakeholder audience. Then authenticity is a really important criterion when it comes to climate claims. Climate strategies have to be built in the wider sustainability strategy of a company, and also the communication around those have to be linked to the wider growth narrative of businesses. Hence, those claims and those communication will be authentic to the brand, will be authentic to the business, and hence will engage stakeholders and consumers much better. And of course, one of the most important things is the impact. Don't show, tell, walk the talk, and think about the impact you make with your climate action. And those are the best stories to tell, right? What is the impact we are doing on the way, on our journey to net zero? So please always frame your narrative and frame your stories within the wider impact, climate positive impact that you make. And here I think I will hand over back to Nick.
Kata, thank you. That was terrific as always. Appreciate your time. Folks who do have some questions, please don't hold back. Just type them right into that question box on your screen and we'll get to those soon. We do have a few that have already rolled in. Once again, thanks to Kata. I'll turn it right over to Carlos and let's keep rolling.
Thank you, Nick and Kata. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So what you see now on the screen is what we call the puzzle of a credible climate action, of a credible climate journey. A credible climate journey is a combination of action today and a commitment to be net zero tomorrow. Net zero is a journey and it cannot be achieved overnight. Therefore, in this journey, companies should already today set science-based targets, reduce their emissions along the value chain, and offset the remaining emissions with carbon credits to be climate neutral. So climate neutrality can be achieved today. On the other hand, even though net zero cannot be immediately achieved, it is paramount that companies start planning it today. This is why at South Pole we have defined a five-step journey to support you in this target. So this is how we at South Pole can support companies along the climate journey. So the first step is to help you measure your footprint. So it's to establish a mapping of all your emissions along the whole value chain. So to help you understand where your emissions come from in order to identify the mitigation potential on each emissions category. Then, by having that in mind, it is really important that you can set a long-term net zero target, so with interim milestones, so to really have a detailed emission reduction plan. Then the third step is probably the most important one, is to actually reduce your footprint, so to make sure that your reduction plan really delivers emission reduction outcomes. Then for all the emissions that we call unavoidable, so the remaining emissions, it is also really important to take the full responsibility of them and to offset them through avoidance or removal credits. And once you have done that, it is really important, and it's the core topic of this webinar, to communicate and to engage with your key stakeholders on your action. So while the journey to net zero takes time and planning and resources, carbon credits or compensation is a very effective way to mitigate unavoidable emissions right now. And there are also a lot of other benefits. So first of all, you show that you already take action today. So while you are acting on decreasing your emissions within your value chain, you take the full responsibility of the remaining emissions through the purchase of carbon credits, which are a proven way to mitigate climate change right now. Then, as Kata already mentioned, it also enhances your brand reputation as an employer first, because now we know that the young generation, so what we call the millennials, are pretty much attracted by companies that they share their value with. So it's really important to also showcase your future employees what you stand for. And it also enhances your brand reputation, because you will also attract new types of customers and so the third main impact or benefit is that when you offset your emissions, you already set an internal price on carbon. So you put a price on any emissions you're producing. So it means that you're factoring in your business decisions, the price of carbon. So that can trigger some decisions. For example, take a very simple example. When you have to book a business travel, you will have a choice between a train ticket or a flight ticket, and unfortunately, currently, it's quite expensive. Traveling by train is quite expensive. But when you include the price of carbon, then it can change your decision. And then also, carbon credits are transparent and solutions to support the transition to net zero, but it has also some other benefits. So it's not just 1 ton of CO2 reduced or removed from the atmosphere, but it has also some other certified and proven impacts on other sustainable development goals. For example, when you support through your offsetting strategy a project that aims at distributing improved cook stoves to population in sub-Saharan Africa, you don't only avoid deforestation, but you also improve the livelihood of the people. So you're also acting towards sustainable development goals that can be aligned with your CSR strategy. So climate neutrality is not just offsetting and forgetting about it, so just paying. The evolution, the definition has been evolving. It used to be in the past just calculation and offsetting, but now climate neutrality claim must be linked to a net zero journey. So climate neutrality is just one step on the way to net zero. So we recognize that both internal reduction, so within your value chain, and compensation via carbon credits are two important elements for maximizing climate action. So considering the global challenge to become climate neutral by 2050, we need to reduce the global emissions by around 80 to 90% by then. So it means that the companies can play a paramount role in reducing within their value chain, but also contributing to reduce beyond their value chain. So when you compensate then the remaining emissions through carbon credits, it's a milestone. So climate neutrality is one key milestone that can be claimed after you have measured, set science-based targets, disclose your reduction plans, and finally compensate your residual emissions. This is when this important milestone can be achieved. So to support you on all these steps, we can provide you technical support, but we can also reward you with a label. At SouthPole, we have 3 different families of labels. The first one is the climate neutral labels. So this is what we are talking about now. So these are labels that reward a company, a product, a site, or an event for their climate neutrality achievement. So these labels are in line with what we call the PAS 2060, which is the international standard for climate neutrality. Then we have another type of labels, so the labels related to the consumption of renewable electricity. So these are aligned, these are a reward to companies that use 100% renewable electricity. So these labels are aligned with the RE100 initiative. The only difference is that the RE100 initiative is only for big companies that consume more than 100 gigawatt hour per year, whereas our labels is affordable for any type of companies. And then we have a third type of labels which are related to plastic action. So this is part of the offering of our circular economy practice. So this is for companies that put on the market plastic and that they match their plastic footprint with plastic collection credits or plastic collection and recycling credits. So why are labels helpful? First of all, we know, and Kata already touched this point upon, that customers, they want transparent information about the product they buy or the brands they engage with and the companies they buy from. So labels is a really important and meaningful way of communication between a company and its customers. So we have different types of environmental labels, but we really think that it's an important way of providing transparent information to the customer, because we know that the customers, they want to make decisions that are aligned with their values. So if you are a brand, you really want to engage your customers and to make sure that you communicate your climate impact transparently to your customer. And at SourcePol, all our labels adhere to the best practice reporting guidance, so the companies can be assured of the robust methodology that you undergo in order to achieve this label. But a label is not a static thing. So as the landscape evolves, as Kat already mentioned, so do our labels. So first of all, there is a growing concern over climate claims globally, especially with the rise in scrutiny of greenwashing claims. So due to this, we needed a higher threshold for labels, and we needed to enhance more transparency. Then science is also evolving. For example, here you see on the screen the latest IPCC report, so the 6th IPCC report that was released in August 2021, so a bit less than 1 year ago. So we needed to make sure that our protocol was aligned with the latest science. And then also we want our labels to adhere to the best practice reporting guidances. For example, on the screen, you can see the SBTi corporate net zero standard that was released in October 2021. And we wanted to make sure that our labels reflect all these updating guidances. So it could be the SBTi guidance, the net zero guidance, but also the GHG protocol. So we have updated our labels. In the new version was released in January 2022. So if you go to the next slide, I can present you the main differences. So first of all, the first difference is that it's not enough to just consider in your scope of calculation, your scope of offsetting, only your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So scope 1 and 2 emissions refer to your direct emissions. We all know that most of a company's emissions is in the value chain, so either upstream or downstream. So it's really important for a company to also consider their emissions along the whole value chain. So that's why we have added all the relevant scope 3 categories in the criteria of the new label. Then before, it was okay to show a reduction plan. But now, for example, we have aligned our requirement with the latest SBTi 1.5 degree trajectory. It is a mandatory criteria. So it is required that your action plan is in line with the 1.5 degree trajectory. And you need to, in a transparent way, to show the progress towards this. One important aspect also is transparency. So it needs that in order to keep the label or to have the label, to obtain the label, you need to provide all the details of what you have achieved to reach the label. So this should be publicly available on your website. So these are the main differences with the former label at SourcePol. So as the landscape is evolving, there are many claims out there, and you want to make sure that you are making the right claim. So that's why we can help you figure out what is the right claim for you. But there, briefly, I want to present you 4 takeaways of this section. First of all, the compensation of residual emissions on the way to net zero can be used to claim an interim milestone of climate neutrality. But climate neutrality does not count towards a corporate net zero claim. So these are 2 different things. Net zero is a long-term commitment. You also need to make sure that carbon neutral or climate neutral can only be used when it's clear that it doesn't mean that it's equivalent to emissions free or zero carbon. These are 2 different things. So you shouldn't be misleading your stakeholders by claiming zero emissions or emissions free. And last but not least, at SourcePol, we can endorse a company climate neutrality claim when it meets the level of ambition and all the criteria that are required by our climate neutral label. So we can help you that, but we will need to align and to meet the criteria of our protocol. So by saying this, I hand it over to Nick. Thank you very much.
Carlos, thank you. That was terrific. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. I know we were going to wait mostly till the end for the Q&A, but we've had a number of people ask a very similar question, and I know you did get into this, but I wonder if you could give us a simplified answer so that we can get around our heads real quick. What really is the difference between net zero and climate neutrality?
So net zero, it's a long-term target when you commit to adopt what we call a 1.5 degree trajectory. So you commit to reduce your emissions by more or less 80%. So it means that you will reduce drastically your emissions, and you commit to neutralize your remaining emissions by investing, for example, in a carbon removal project. So it means that you will reduce drastically your emissions and that you will remove from the atmosphere the remaining emissions. And this is the global goal that we should reach at the global level by 2050. So a drastic reduction in order to make sure that we have the capacity to remove from the atmosphere the remaining emissions that should represent only 10 to 15% of what we are emitting now, because the planet Earth has a limited capacity of absorption through nature-based solutions, and the technology is not mature yet to make sure that it will be feasible in the future. So it's in climate neutral, as I say, it's a key milestone now that you commit to this long-term target, but already now, in the meanwhile, while you are still achieving this target, you are offsetting your emissions.
Thank you. I think it's time to turn it over to Vicky. Are you there, Vicky?
Sure am.
We'll wrap it up with part 3. And again, folks, please keep the questions coming. Type them in the box and we'll get to them.
Terrific. Thanks, Nick. And thanks, Carlos, for that as well. So today I'm going to be talking to you about authentic engagement. So where the rest of the team has really sort of given you set the scene really in terms of what it means to take robust climate action, the importance of robust, incredible, authentic claims. What I really wanted to talk to you about is the fact that, well, okay, you may well have a very robust climate strategy in place, but what do you do with it? How do you translate that to brand value and customer preference? For us, the only way really to make your climate plan a reality and to really benefit from it in terms of that translation to brand value is to bring on board all the humans you need to deliver it. You know, really having something on paper without a lot of people who are engaged and onboarded and tooled up to help you deliver it, it's not going to happen. So for us, it's this piece that really helps you to make it happen. In terms of what stakeholders we're talking about, it really goes all the way from sort of top down, bottom up leadership, your employee base, your investors, suppliers, media as a conduit to a lot of those audiences, and customers. When we talk about each of those different audiences, they all have a very specific role to play in the decarbonisation journey. So if we look at it from a decarbonisation perspective and we look at your scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, and all of the kind of mechanisms and mechanics that are involved in that decarbonisation journey, every single one of these things involves a human being. So for us, it's just really important to bear in mind that as you decarbonize, and in order to actually make that happen, we need to onboard, engage, tool up, and inspire every single human being involved in the supply chain and the value chain to actually play their role and play their part. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's really important that you put in place a really robust plan in order to engage each of these individuals. So if you think about your sort of direct emissions, we're talking really, a lot of that is about internal communications and getting that completely right. Also talking to your suppliers, direct suppliers. When we're talking about indirect scope 2 emissions, again, we start to think more about the supply chain. We start to think more about your suppliers and your value chain and how you engage them in terms of behavior change, in terms of bringing them along that journey with you, and education. With scope 3 emissions, again, we're talking about you know, everyone from the farm to the table, depending on your sector or industry. But it's about thinking about every single human being down the chain and how you can give them what they need. And for me, that's a journey of tell me, show me, involve me. What do they need to know in order to actually help you on that journey? How are they going to kind of digest and immerse themselves in that information in a way that's real to them? Show them. How are you going to get them to a point where they can actually help you to make it happen, involve them? So for us, it's about developing a really robust communication strategy to make sure that you're bringing every human being that has an impact on the outcome along with you the whole time. So how do you do it? Okay, for us, again, it starts with a big idea. A lot of people don't start there. They start with thinking about who it is they're talking to and what it is they need to hear. A really good example of a brand that does it really, really well is Nike. I mean, when it comes to climate and the way that they communicate their climate credentials and the way they onboard and bring on board all of their stakeholders, it's extremely clever, but it's also incredibly strategic. So they start with this big idea. And what's wonderful about this big idea and the brands that get it really right is that there's very few other organizations in the world that could claim this proposition, that could claim this as their big idea, this one sticky, pointy, crunchy idea that acts as a kind of point of inspiration and springboard for absolutely everything they do and everything they say on climate. So for Nike, it's if there is no planet, there is no sport. This is a statement of fact, but what it does is it kind of starts to bring people along and care about it. Why should I invest in this? Well, because I care about sport. So what they do then when they've developed this big idea is they start to kind of use that as a springboard for big messages. Now, what happens when you have a proposition that's really unique, very, very relevant, very chewy, very sticky, very pointy, is that it creates this ability to let everything hang from it in a way that makes you feel sorted. It creates a salience and a consistency, so it becomes recognizable. So once you've got the big idea, as I said, you can use it as a springboard for big messages, but then moving on, you can develop a unique identity. So when you create something like Move to Zero, which is the identity that they use to wrap this proposition up in, it's totally recognizable, it's memorable, and it's immediate. Anytime you see Move to Zero, you know it's Nike. But they do this really clever thing with messaging and keeping it very simple. And they just explain Move to Zero is Nike's journey toward zero carbon and zero waste to help protect the future of sport. Again, bringing it back to that really pointy, big idea that's completely unique to them. Moving on. So what do you do? What's the next step? It's really important to figure out how you take some of that really quite complex, data-driven information and turn it into something that's intelligible and digestible for your stakeholders, including your investor audience, but also all the way down to consumers who have that keen interest. So where it's part of a consumer's status sphere or value sphere, it's really important that they have the access to information that they can understand in order to make informed decisions where that forms part of their ethical credentials. So for us, that's all about creating accessibility through easy to understand design that brings technical information to life, and Nike do that incredibly well. Moving on from that, the next thing that you need to think about is your leadership. So, you know, it's all well and good that that you've got a strategy in place and that your sustainability team understands exactly what it is you need to do. You may have even communicated that out to your comms team and other teams. You might have started talking to your supply chain and suppliers. But unless your leadership is walking the talk, it's going to be very, very difficult to convince the world that you really mean it. It's also going to be really difficult to inspire your individual teams and your employee base to take action if it's not coming top down as well as bottom up in terms of values and alignment. So for us, that training up leaders to speak confidently and credibly and inspire others because they've understood it so well themselves is a really key part of getting this right. Moving on to employees, I mean, as I mentioned, you know, leadership is obviously a key component of employee engagement, but beyond that, there's a lot of stuff you can do. And again, it comes back to the tell me, show me, involve me recipe that we think works so well. And for the workforce, it's just really important that people understand it as part of their job. Now, a lot of organizations struggle with this. They struggle with it for a number of reasons, but one of the big things that comes up a lot of the time is that you've got people who are responsible for making decisions in terms of innovation or buying, for instance, and supplier relationships, where they now have new criteria to work with, but it's complicated. And making it happen overnight isn't very easy. So I think the first thing is to create rigor around what it is you're asking of them in terms of what are the new standards when you're developing a new product or you're innovating around a product. What are the new standards? It's not just about quality, convenience, and value. Those aren't the trifecta anymore. Climate and sustainability has to play a major role And the more you kind of develop systems and processes internally that enable people to judge what they're doing from a climate value perspective and a decarbonization perspective, the more you're going to bring them on board and slowly get them to integrate that into key decision making for the organization. Media is obviously, as we talked about, a major conduit. When you're talking about your investor relationships, but also beyond that to consumers, and all of your audiences have access to media. So really, this is a reputation management platform. Now, cleverly, a lot of organizations are very good at turning media scrutiny into opportunities, and there are some really interesting and fun ways to do that. But if we're talking about media just from a kind of the way to really amplify and speak about your work, putting it out there in the public spotlight, what Nike do and what organizations who get this very right tend to do is create not just a generic headline around what your ambition is, but to figure out how do you create a story that is really sticky, really topical, and sits really has strength on its own outside of the kind of the broader messaging. And so when Nike talks about the fact that they're making shoes you can take apart, or they're introducing one box that cleverly is the shoe box, but also the box that you ship it in, it's an interesting story. That's something that's fun. They focus on innovation, they focus on what they're doing, and they also focus on partnerships with individuals that people love and other brands that people love. And that's just a really clever way to create that connection and bring yourselves into people's lives in a way that is authentic and connecting. Great reporting promotes investor confidence. I mean, a lot of people, you see reports and they're tricky to read. I mean, I get them a lot, and I have to say, even myself, and I work in this environment, daily, I find it difficult to read reports. I tend to kind of skim them and then look for the bit that's important. So I think from a human perspective, if you want someone to read your report and to come away feeling confident and come away feeling like, you know what, we should be investing in them. They've answered every single one of my questions and my boxes are ticked and I feel safe in that knowledge, but also from an other stakeholder perspective, let them feel inspired by what you're doing. A report is to some extent a manifesto. It's not just saying what we're doing, it's saying why we're doing it. Bring them on board, make them feel that proposition, that reason, that why, the springboard for action. What is it you're doing this for? Is it to protect the future of sport? Talk about that. And again, make it really digestible with the way that you visualize really complex data and information. I think I've already talked about a little bit about programs and partnerships and those relationships that you create. Programs and partnerships obviously can help massively, particularly if you're talking about NGO relationships where you're doing something that's credible and NGOs are willing to sit beside you and sort of communicate that message with you, particularly when it comes to kind of campaign activism and behavior change. But beyond that, innovation obviously is a really good way of positioning yourselves as a climate leader. Nike is again a really good example of that with the fact that they've created a whole new aspect or filter for their e-commerce site, which is around products that are made from sustainable materials. So, for instance, their zero waste trainers, etc. They are products that are all based on this idea of circularity, but also they're about reducing carbon in their production lines. So it's a really interesting way of kind of marrying up that LCA conversation with and the circular economy with innovation and new products. As I said before, this whole thing about meeting people where they are, this thing about talking to consumers in a way that is topical and relevant and connecting. Again, Nike do this incredibly well. And this is really goes beyond climate to their ESG strategy. They meet people where they are and they make sure they do it in a way that doesn't feel marketing-y. It doesn't feel like they're kind of trying to jump on the bandwagon and have a conversation like, you're talking to your dad. It's not like that. They come and they speak to you and tonally get it incredibly right. They speak to you, meeting you exactly where you are in a tone that's completely relevant for you. So when we kind of try and pull this all together, really what we're saying is our approach is to always try and work out what this big idea is. What is the value proposition that makes you entirely unique, that is only really relevant to you, brings your consumers and your other stakeholders on board, and is inspiring, but also completely true. Then we look at your claims and your narrative. So how do you, from the springboard of that proposition, that big idea, how do you develop a salient, really compelling, really passionate narrative that's also credible? Including your claims, and that's about creating a kind of generic narrative that talks to everybody, and then filtering that down to a comms platform or copy platform that tells you what you need to say to every single audience. We then bring it to life with design and visuals in a way that makes it totally understandable and accessible to everybody. Train your leaders to make sure that they're confident to lead from the front. Engage your employees so everybody feels like it's their job and they're really excited about it. So yeah, that's it for me. Yeah, okay, I'll carry on. We then help you to engage with media in the right way, whether that be about outward bound messages or you responding. Look at your corporate communications generally, your whole suite of corporate communications and how you present your big idea or your approach, and develop customer campaigns and innovation, ways of engaging and involving people so that really they want to help you make it happen. Thank you for listening. That's all from me.
Vicky, fantastic. Lots and lots to digest, judging by the quantity and quality of questions we have here. We're in store for a nice little follow-up conversation here. Just a few takeaways. Take a screenshot of this slide if you like. It's probably one of the better ones to walk away with. But you know, to basically summarize, the world is changing. This stuff is happening. Not only is climate change underway, but people expect you to be doing something about it and to be talking about it. To do so, you got to be credible. You know, that's pretty much the foundation. And of course, you have to be smart about it as well. So don't try to fake it. This isn't about you know, quick answers. This is about listening and learning, taking action, and communicating effectively and intelligently. So, folks, I think we'll jump into the questions here. I'm going to pull up my notes. I think the first one might be a good one for Kata. Question is, if I'm not in a position to claim net zero or climate neutrality, what can I say? Are there alternative claims I can make? And
Yeah,
everybody, feel free to come off turn on your cameras. We might as well have a little quorum here.
Thanks, Nick. And the most important thing is to start taking action, credible climate action. And then when you are not in a position to set yet a net zero trajectory and within that claim a milestone of climate neutrality, you can still do a lot. You can still communicate about what you are actually doing. What is your impact? How does that impact relate to your wider sustainability or business strategy? How do you impact your communities around you? There are so many authentic stories to your actual climate action that can be done without offering or going for so to say catch-all claims. So really talk about what you are really doing and do it in a way that's authentic to you. And just to come back to what Carlos has said, do not ever imply that your company or products or services are emission free. We are all on this journey, so let's get started and let's talk about what we are actually doing.
Excellent, thank you, Kata. All right, carrying on here. Looks like a good one for you, Carlos. So if compensation is a part of climate neutrality, how does one ensure that they are investing in good projects?
Yes, thank you for the good question. So a key requirement to claim climate neutrality is to offset your emissions through certified carbon credits. So there are a couple of standards, organisms that certified that a project is really delivering emission reductions. So you need to make sure that what you are paying for, what you get in exchange, is a certified carbon credit. So you have different types. So just for you to remember it, you have the gold standard, which is a very robust standard that certifies projects that have a high impact on local communities. You have Vera, which is another well-known standard that is based in the US, and these standards really make sure that the project you're supporting is credible and robust and audited by a third party.
Excellent, thanks, Carlos. Just another quick one to follow up. Some folks are asking about label requirements. Question is, would one need to publish a reduction plan to get a label?
Yeah, as we mentioned, transparency is key. So it means that you need, one of the requirements to get the labels, and you need to publicly disclose how you got the label. So you need to publish not a detailed reduction plan, with all the financial analysis and the financial investment, but at least to tell your stakeholders how you're going to reach the science-based target that you are setting. So it means that you need to present in a high level the measures you're going to implement.
Cool, excellent. Vicky, one for you. Rolling through some of the examples that you shared, a lot of those are big brands, Nike, for example, or Nike, as the British say. What about smaller companies? What are some realistic steps for smaller companies to take?
I mean, look, if I'm honest, I think it's still the same approach applies. It's just that you don't put the kind of budget that Nike has behind it, and it's just about being really clever with the budget that you do have. I think starting with a proposition, that's something that you can work up internally. That really pointy idea is something that's really ownable for you. When it comes to the engagement, it's just about choosing channels that are more direct, because obviously we all know that they're less expensive. So it's not about big splashy, point of sale materials necessarily, or above the line advertising, but thinking about how you can very cleverly use other channels in order to make the same impact. So it's really still the same recipe of figuring out who you're talking to, what they think now, what you need them to think or do, figuring out what that big idea is and what your narrative is, which is again something that you don't need to spend a huge amount of money on if you've got the brains internally to work on that. And then figuring out really it's the channel mix that you need to think about in terms of cost limitation. So use direct channels, think about how you can use social channels in particular in order to reach people in a way that's really targeted but makes the biggest bang for your buck.
Thank you, Vicky. All right, next question, either Kata or Carlos, or both of you if you like. In reference to the net zero standard, which was set by the Science Based Targets Initiative at the end of last year, from a communications perspective, should companies now set a net zero target or a carbon neutral target?
Yeah, I think I can start, and then Carlos, please feel free to comment. So basically the whole idea, the world has to become net zero by 2050. That's the end goal. And within that perspective, everything that we do, it can be a big or small action today should lead towards a net zero trajectory. So that's basically the common direction, the common vision of humanity on this earth. And today what we discussed more about was that, okay, what is the milestone as of today that you can do? So it's a little bit of a holistic approach, and again, just repeating myself, where action is the most important, and then communication. Carlos?
No, I agree with you. That what is really important is that net zero is the global goal by 2050. So I would encourage you to be ambitious and to set a net zero long-term target, which is made of different interim targets, and climate neutrality can be one of these interim targets.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. So probably back to you, Carlos. When we're doing, when it comes to residual emissions, what's the threshold? I mean, I don't know if that's a generic enough. I don't know if there is a generic answer to that, but how would one go about determining where you place that threshold?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a tricky question. So there is no threshold. I mean, what is really important is when you claim climate neutrality today, is that you have a clear and transparent science-based target. So it means that you commit to reduce your emissions by a certain level that is aligned with science. And you need to transparently communicate on your progress towards the achievement of this target. So there is no real threshold, but it's true that if you don't reduce, after some years, you might not be eligible anymore for the label, because for the label you need to show progress towards your target. So I think, and Leo is in the call, that after 3 years, when you are not showing any progress towards the targets, that you cannot claim climate neutrality anymore. So there is no real threshold as long as there is a real actions that are implementing.
Got it. Excellent. All right, we got a couple more questions. We will stick around if anyone has any more. Please don't hold back. Go ahead and throw those into the chat box. Probably still another one for you, Carlos. Vintages. Can you explain what that means and talk about what vintage of credits are allowed when it comes to carbon neutrality?
Vintages, you mean? Yeah, okay. The vintage is the year during which the credit has been, the emission reduction or removal has occurred. So when you purchase a certified carbon credit with a vintage 2020, for example, it means that the reduction has occurred in 2020. For now, there is a new guideline that is being developed by ISO. That is a new guideline. So the current guideline is called the PAS 2060. It's a bit old. It was released in 2014, and now there is a new version that is upcoming. And there will be a clear guidance on the use of a certain vintage. And there will be a clear limitation on vintage, meaning that you won't be able in the future to offset your remaining emissions through a very old vintage. I think that for now, it's not, the decision hasn't been taken yet, but for now, the 5 years old. It means that if you want to claim neutrality for 2022, for example, you will be able to use a vintage, a credit that has been generated for a reduction that occurred in 2017.
Excellent. Carlos, the questions are just going to keep coming to you here. We have someone who, it's a little bit of a broad question, but the question is, what kind of companies do we work with? If we imagine that we created as we create roadmaps for the decarbonization journey, hypothetical examples, let's imagine the cement industry, for example. What would we advise in that case? Would we consider carbon capture? How would we assess the risks? Any comments on that particular industry? So,
yes. Yeah. So we are working with any kind of companies. I think we have a blacklist of certain companies we don't really want to work with, but we are working with cement companies, we're working with a retail sector, with any type of companies. And for each of companies, we are helping them elaborate their own reduction action plan. So it depends from one sector to another one. And when we analyze the different possibilities for this particular company, we really analyze the feasibility, the risk related to the measure, the cost related to the measure, and we try really to prioritize, what we call the low-hanging fruit. So the measures that produce revenues, because most of the measures that you will implement first are energy saving measures. So that means that you will save money. So these ones are the measures we call no regret measures that you will need to implement anyway. And then you will go to more like long-term measures that could be, for example, carbon capture, as you mentioned. There is a risk now because it's not really scalable for now, but we try really to make a holistic reduction plan that takes into account all the different parameters, so the mitigation potential, the investment needed, the return on investment, the risk, the legal aspect, etc. But it's a very like a bespoke reduction plan, and there is not one fit all solution. It's company per company.
Wonderful. We got one more question left, unless folks want to jump in quick. It's kind of a similar question, actually. There's somebody that's focused largely on SDG number 6, which is drinking water and sanitation. They're a public water utility company and are curious what the pathway towards neutrality might look for that particular type of enterprise.
Is it for me, Nick? Yeah, okay.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so apart from the reduction plan, it's really important to also have an idea and yeah, having your mind clear about what type of project you want to support. And SDG is a good indicator, because if you're a public water utility company, then SDG 6 is really important to you. So you might it might be a key parameter, a key to decide which type of project you would like to support. For SDG 6, you have different types of projects that have a really strong impact on water sanitation and make the water drinkable, etc. So you have different projects that aim at developing or rehabilitating boreholes in South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, sorry, where these projects support the use and the rehabilitation of boreholes, so bringing drinkable water to the local population, meaning that they won't need to boil the water to make it drinkable. So we will reduce or avoid CO2 emissions by avoiding deforestation. So this is where it is how the emissions the reductions are calculated, is on the avoided deforestation, thanks to these boreholes. And also other SDGs are analyzed, for example, SDG 6, when you analyze the amount of water, of drinkable water that is brought to the local population, so you avoid diseases, you improve the hygiene of the local population, etc. So you have really one type of project. It's commonly called safe water supply project or borehole project, and most of them are certified by the gold standard. So if you Google gold standard water supply project, you will find different list of different projects that have a particular focus on SDG 6.
And can I add to that, Nick? I think the reason why this question is brilliant in a wider perspective is because it shows that a company is intentional about the project they are supporting, and intentional in a way that it should support their core business. It should be aligned with their core business strategy, and also it shows that they care and focus on impact. And that's really the combination that we really encourage companies to do: be intentional and focus on impact. And then, just to come back to the topic of communication, then our job and your comms team's job will be much easier if this combination is really the foundation of the compensation strategy.
All right, a couple more questions came on in. Probably again for Carlos here. Digital traceability of carbon credits. What do you think of that? Is that something we're working on?
Sorry. Yeah. So you have digital traceability in the sense that when a project issues a credit, there is a transaction, a serial number on this credit, and it appears on the registry, and you can track when this certificate or carbon credit is transferred to another entity. You can track where it is transferred. So in a way, there is traceability. But what all the standards and the project developers are working on is also on the tokenization of the emission reduction. So it's trying to link and to improve the monitoring of the emission reduction. This is something that is ongoing, is to make sure that we can monitor, and it makes more sense when it's a project that implies a decentralized action. For example, the distribution of improved cook stoves to an entire population. It means that in each household you have one asset that creates a carbon credit. So it's challenging for the monitoring side of the project. So the tokenization, it's something that the standards and the project are working on to make sure that we can trace any emission reduction. But for now, let's say that the carbon credits have a serial number, and this is traced, and we see where it goes, who has issued the credit and who is purchasing the credit, who is transferring the credit, and who is finally retiring the credit for a claim. So because you can only claim climate neutrality, for example, when you retire the credit, so it means that it cannot be used again.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question. I think we'll throw it out to you, Vicky. When putting together a sustainability report, what aspects of today's discussion are important? What data, for example, do we need? And are there any standards when it comes to, with regards to the sustainability report itself?
I mean, when some of that perhaps Carlos can jump in on, but I think generally what I would say is, as long as you're being really clear about your footprint, your value chain emissions, so presenting that information very, very clearly and being very clear about your roadmap. So whether it's a net zero roadmap or it's about decarbonisation generally without the net zero end goal, just being very clear about where you are now, where is you aim to be, and how you aim to get there. Really, I'd say that all communications around this space should really follow that narrative. So it's about that clarity and making sure that where you have certifications, etc., around some of your activities, that you're very clear about what those are, and that you are clear about methodologies involved and the different methodologies that you've utilized to either calculate your current footprint or the footprint of your value chain, so that everything is credible and verifiable. So I'd say that those are aspects that you should look at. But in terms of the overarching narrative, as long as you're communicating where you are, you're being very, very tangible, realistic and holistic about it, where it is you aim to be and how you aim to get there in incremental milestones that are achievable and provably achievable, demonstrably achievable. Really, the way that you communicate that is open. It's just making sure that you include these constituent elements, for me.
Well, folks, with that, I think we may wrap it up. We'll have a virtual round of applause for our panelists. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to be so eloquent and helpful. As I mentioned, we do have a recording of this. You'll get a link to that. Feel free to share it. And we also have a report for you, which will be ready very soon. You'll be getting an email after this webinar at some point with some instructions for how to get a hold of that. And of course, do feel free to reach out to us with additional questions. And it was a terrific to have you here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.